Hello everyone. Thank you for clicking on this video. Are you having trouble falling asleep? You're in the right place. The Scary Nightmare is here to help you find peace before bed. But before we begin, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any updates that will help you relax. Now, lie down comfortably, take a deep breath, and let go of any tension. The story is about to begin. As night fell, enveloping the world outside in a thick cloak of darkness, a strange calm descended upon Ashwood Manor. This grand estate, once filled with laughter and life, had been silent for decades. The mansion, with its crumbling stone walls and ivy-clad facades, stood as a somber reminder of an era long past. Its creaky wooden floors and whispering winds made it a place that locals only dared to approach when the sun was still high in the sky. But tonight was different. The moon hung low, casting long, ghostly shadows that seemed to dance on the walls. A thick fog had rolled in, curling around the mansion like a living thing. It was as if the very air had thickened, charged with something unseen, something ancient. And I, your narrator, found myself standing in front of those large iron-wrought gates, staring up at the looming structure. It was a strange pull, an irresistible curiosity that had brought me here. They said Ashwood Manor was haunted. The whispers of its cursed past had made their way through the village for generations. But I didn't believe in ghosts or curses, or at least I thought I didn't. The iron gates creaked as I pushed them open, the sound sharp and jarring against the stillness of the night. My steps echoed across the gravel driveway, the crunch of stones underfoot somehow too loud in the oppressive silence. As I drew closer to the front door, the mansion seemed to grow taller, more imposing. Its windows were dark, like black, empty eyes watching my every move. I reached the door, and without thinking, I placed my hand on the brass doorknob. It was cold, unnaturally cold, as if it had been touched by something beyond the living world. The moment my fingers made contact, I felt it. A shift in the air, a sudden oppressive weight that pressed against my chest. I hesitated for a moment, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach, but I quickly brushed it off. I was here to investigate, to prove to myself that there was nothing to fear. With a slow turn, the door creaked open, revealing a dark, cavernous hallway. The scent of dust and old wood filled my nostrils, and the faintest sound of wind whispered through the cracks in the walls. There was a dim light coming from the far end of the hall, though no light seemed to come from any source. It was as if the light itself had been absorbed into the very walls, giving the space an ethereal glow. I stepped inside. As I moved deeper into the manor, the temperature seemed to drop, the chill sinking into my bones. The air felt heavy, thick with something I couldn't quite place. It wasn't just the dust or the age of the building. No, it was something else, something old, something dark. The floorboards creaked beneath my feet as I walked, but there was something strange about the sound, something wrong. It was as if they were groaning. The house was alive, reacting to my presence. I could almost hear the whispers, faint, fleeting, like a soft breath brushing against my ear. I turned quickly, but there was no one there. I continued, drawn towards the staircase at the end of the hall. It spiraled upward, disappearing into the darkness above. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as if the house itself were calling to me, urging me to climb, to ascend into the unknown. And so I did. Each step felt heavier than the last. The air grew colder, the walls closing in around me. With every breath I took, the whispers seemed to grow, swirling around me like 1,000 unseen voices. I could hear them clearly now, though they made no sense. fragments of words, syllables that echoed in the back of my mind. It was then that I saw it, a figure standing at the top of the stairs. At first it was nothing more than a shadow, but as I drew closer, I could make out the faintest outline of a person. It was tall, impossibly tall, and draped in a cloak of darkness that seemed to shift and writhe like smoke. My heart raced. I wanted to turn and run, but my legs were frozen, rooted to the spot. The figure remained still, motionless, staring down at me with eyes that I couldn't see but felt nonetheless. They burned into me, deep into my very soul, like they could see all of my fears, all of my deepest secrets. The whispers grew louder, now a chorus of voices, each one distinct, each one speaking in a language I couldn't understand. They filled my head, pressing against my skull, threatening to break my mind. I reached up, clutching my head, desperate to block out the sound, but it was useless. The voices were all around me, closing in. And then, the figure moved. It didn't walk, it floated, drifting silently down the stairs, its cloak swirling around it like a shadowy mist. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe as it came closer, its presence like an overwhelming force pressing against me. In the dim light, I could make out its face, or what should have been a face. It was a blank void, a dark abyss where its eyes should have been. The emptiness was worse than any face could have been. I wanted to scream, to run, but my voice was caught in my throat, strangled by the fear that paralyzed me. The figure reached out, its hand an elongated, skeletal thing, and I knew deep in my bones that it wasn't offering help. It was offering something far worse. And then the floor beneath me cracked. The floor beneath me cracked, a deep, resonant sound that echoed through the silence of the mansion. The room seemed to shift, as though the very foundation of the manor was stirring in response to the figure's presence. My heart pounded in my chest, louder than the sound of the breaking wood, but it was the growing rift in the floor that truly drew my attention. The crack spread outward, snaking its way across the wooden boards, and the cold air grew more intense. The walls seemed to lean in closer, the weight of the space itself pressing down on me. I felt as if the house were alive, watching, waiting, anticipating my next move. It was as if the manor had been waiting for me to arrive, for me to make this fatal misstep. The figure moved towards the rift, gliding effortlessly over the broken floorboards, its skeletal hand reaching out, as if it were about to claim the space itself. My breath caught in my throat as I tried to take a step back, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. I was rooted to the spot, unable to move, paralyzed by a terror far deeper than anything I had ever known. The figure paused just before the rift, and its head tilted, as if it were studying me. For a brief, fleeting moment, I could have sworn I saw a glimmer of something alive beneath the void of its face. A faint spark, a glimmer of a human-like emotion, perhaps. But no sooner had it appeared than it was gone, swallowed by the emptiness. The whispers grew louder now, a cacophony of voices that clawed at my mind, trying to break through the walls of my sanity. Some of the voices were unintelligible, others clear as day, repeating the same words over and over. Don't look back, don't go further. But it was too late. The pull of the house, of the figure, was too strong. The figure stepped closer, the dark cloak swirling around it like a living shadow, as though it were made of the very night itself. With every step it took, the ground beneath my feet seemed to tremble, and the shadows around me grew deeper. There was no light now, save for the dim glow that emanated from the very walls that seemed to breathe, to pulse with life. I forced myself to take a step back, but the figure was faster. It reached out with its skeletal hand and gently, almost tenderly, touched my arm. The contact was ice cold, and I felt a wave of paralysis sweep through my body. I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe. The figure leaned in, its face still a gaping void, but I could feel its presence close. So close that I could almost hear its thoughts. Or perhaps it was more than just its thoughts. It was as if the house itself, through the figure, was speaking directly into my mind. "You shouldn't have come." The words were not spoken aloud, but reverberated through my very soul, chilling me to the core. I felt a pressure on my chest, as though the weight of the entire mansion were crushing me. My eyes began to water from the sheer force of the energy radiating from the figure. The shadows seemed to stretch, to grow, as if the darkness itself were trying to consume me whole. I tried to scream, but no sound came. My throat was too tight, too constricted. The whispers in my mind had become a maddening chorus now. Fragments of voices, fragments of memories all blending together, telling me to run, to escape. But there was no escape. The house, the figure, the very ground beneath my feet, it was all part of something ancient, something far beyond my understanding. And then, the floor beneath me cracked once more, but this time it was different. The entire room seemed to collapse inward, as if the space itself were folding in on itself. I stumbled backward, my body moving instinctively as the shadows surged toward me, reaching out with long, twisted limbs, their fingers like sharp claws. I couldn't see anything clearly anymore. The darkness had swallowed everything. My mind was unraveling, caught between the pull of the figure, the suffocating darkness, and the overwhelming sense that I had made a mistake, one that I could never undo. The whispers reached a fever pitch, their voices now blending into a singular, haunting sound. "Join us." A cold hand gripped my wrist, pulling me forward. I didn't have the strength to resist. I didn't even know if I wanted to anymore. The sensation of being dragged through the darkness was overwhelming, a force far beyond anything I had ever experienced. And then, in the distance, I saw it. A faint light, a soft glow through the murk. It flickered like a candle flame, far off in the distance. It was the only thing that seemed real in this place. Desperately, I tried to move toward it, my feet dragging, my body unwilling to obey. As I neared the light, it seemed to draw closer too, until it became a door, a simple wooden door that stood alone in the center of the void. It beckoned me, promising something: freedom, escape, or perhaps just the end. I didn't know. I couldn't know. All I knew was that I had to reach it. With what little strength I had left, I reached for the door. The figure's hand slipped from my wrist, but I could still feel its presence behind me, watching, waiting. The cold, suffocating darkness seemed to follow me, closing in on my every step. I touched the doorknob. It was warm. For a moment I dared to hope, maybe, just maybe, this was the way out. But as I twisted the knob and pushed the door open, a sharp gust of wind slammed it back into my face. The whispers ceased. The figure was gone. The shadows retreated, and I was left standing in front of nothing but a door, an empty space. There was no escape. The door was still open, but all that awaited me beyond it was a vast emptiness, stretching endlessly into the unknown. A cold draft poured through the threshold, and the once faint whispers had returned, now louder than ever, rushing through the air like a tide of voices calling from some distant, unseen place. The house, this forsaken manor, seemed to pulsate with an eerie rhythm, like the beating of a heart, slow and deliberate, yet suffocating in its persistence. I hesitated, torn between the pull of the unknown and the dread that anchored my feet to the ground. It was clear now that this place was not like any other. It wasn't just a house. It was a living, breathing entity, a prison that thrived on the fears and souls of those who dared to cross its threshold. But then, As if by instinct, I stepped forward. Something inside me, something deep and primal, urged me onward. I couldn't stay here in this empty space, this silence that threatened to swallow me whole. The house was waiting for me to move, to make a choice, and there was only one path left. I crossed the threshold of the door. The moment my foot passed through, the temperature plummeted. The warmth from the door vanished instantly, replaced by an icy coldness that seeped into my skin, into my very bones. I shivered involuntarily, but I couldn't stop. I kept walking forward, the shadows closing in around me like an ever-tightening noose. It felt as though the walls themselves were moving, pulsating, breathing, alive with the memories of those who had come before me. The whispers became clearer now, each voice distinct yet unified in their tone. They were speaking in languages I didn't understand, a blend of ancient dialects and guttural sounds that scraped against my mind like jagged stones. The sound was overwhelming, disorienting. My head throbbed with the pressure of it, but I pressed on, drawn by the faintest glimmer of light that flickered in the distance. The light, I realized, was not coming from any lamp or candle. It was an unnatural glow, like moonlight trapped within the very air itself. It illuminated an ornate archway ahead, its edges adorned with symbols that twisted and writhed as if alive. The markings on the arch were ancient, their meanings lost to time, but I could feel their power radiating from them. This place, this door, was not meant to be opened. Yet, there I was, standing at the threshold. I reached out with trembling hands and grasped the cold stone of the arch. A sudden shock of energy coursed through me, and I recoiled instinctively, my body jerking back as if rejecting the force. My breath caught in my throat, my heart racing faster than I thought possible. The whispers grew louder, louder still, until they were no longer whispers at all. They became a roar, a cacophony of voices that filled the air, the walls, the very ground beneath me. My legs wobbled, threatening to give way, but I refused to fall. I couldn't fall. Not now. A low, guttural laugh echoed from behind me, deep, echoing, and otherworldly. I spun around, my eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement, but there was nothing. Only shadows. I turned back to face the archway, steeling myself for whatever lay beyond it. But before I could take another step, I heard it. The faintest sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from within the archway itself. The light flickered again, as if it were being disturbed by something unseen. And then, out of the darkness, a figure emerged. At first it was nothing more than a shadow, but it grew closer, becoming more defined with each passing second. It was tall, its form stretched and elongated, but it was not the height that unsettled me. No, it was the way it moved. Unnaturally smooth, as if it were gliding rather than walking. Its face was obscured by a hood, but there was no mistaking the aura of malevolence that surrounded it. The figure's cloak shimmered with a strange, ethereal light, like starlight trapped in the folds of fabric. And as it drew closer, I could feel the temperature drop further, the air growing thick with something ancient, something older than time itself. I tried to speak, to demand answers, but no words came out. My throat was dry, my tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. The figure stopped just in front of me, standing perfectly still, as though it were waiting for me to make the next move. The silence was unbearable, yet in the distance I could hear the faintest sound, a heartbeat, slow, steady, but deafening in its intensity. It was the heartbeat of the house, the pulse of Ashwood Manor, thumping in time with my own. I could feel it now, deep within my chest, the rhythm of the house becoming one with me. And then, the figure reached out a hand that wasn't made of flesh, but of shadow. like a dark wisp of smoke twisting and writhing in the shape of a hand. It hovered just inches from my face, and as I looked into the depths of the darkness where its face should have been, I saw something. Something impossible. A pair of eyes, two black orbs, stared back at me, reflecting my own fear. But there was no warmth in those eyes, no humanity. They were cold, void of any life, and yet I couldn't look away. The figure spoke, though its lips never moved. The voice came from the air itself, from the very walls of the house, from everywhere and nowhere all at once. The words were not in a language I could understand, yet I knew exactly what it was saying. It was a warning, a promise. You are mine now. The air around me grew heavier, the darkness pressing in from all sides. I could feel the walls closing in, suffocating me, as if Ashwood Manor itself were claiming me, pulling me deeper into its heart. My knees buckled, and I fell to the ground, but I couldn't escape. The house, this place, would not let me go. Not now, not ever. The figure reached out again, and this time I felt its cold, shadowy fingers wrap around my wrist. It wasn't just physical. The touch was inside me, crawling into my mind, wrapping around my thoughts, controlling my very will. I wanted to scream, to fight, to tear myself free, but it was useless. My body no longer belonged to me. My mind, my soul, they were already slipping away, lost to the darkness of Ashwood Manor. And as I drifted into the endless void, I understood. I was no longer a guest in this house. I was part of it. I awoke with a start, gasping for air, my chest heaving as though I had been suffocating in the very depths of the earth. My surroundings were unfamiliar, nothing like the hallways or rooms of Ashwood Manor. This place was different. It was dark, but not the oppressive, thick darkness that had consumed me before. It was soft, like velvet, and yet still carried a sense of foreboding. The air felt damp, the floor beneath me cold and uneven, as if I was lying on stone. My eyes adjusted slowly to the dimness around me, revealing the faint outline of walls stretching upward into an infinite void. There was no light, no flicker of a candle, no moonlight spilling through the windows. Just the crushing, heavy silence that pressed against me, making every movement feel as though it was an intrusion into a world long forgotten. But something wasn't right. I could feel it. A presence in the air, a subtle shift that sent a shiver down my spine. I wasn't alone. The walls seemed to pulse, the faintest vibrations humming beneath my fingertips as I reached out to steady myself. There was a sensation, deep within the marrow of my bones, that something was waiting for me to rise, to move, to make a sound. I stood, my legs unsteady at first, and took a slow step forward. The ground seemed to groan beneath my feet, as though it were aware of my every motion. I could hear something, a sound, distant and muffled, as if it were coming from behind the walls or beneath the very floorboards. It wasn't the soft whispering I had heard before. It was louder, a rhythmic, pulsing sound. Almost breathing. I looked around, my eyes scanning the shadows. Was I still in Ashwood Manor? Was this some new part of the house, an undiscovered section hidden away from the world? Or had I been taken somewhere else entirely, somewhere far worse? My heart pounded as I moved cautiously forward. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming now, pressing in from all sides. It was as if the darkness itself was alive, conscious, aware of my every move. The floor beneath me shifted again. No, not the floor. Something beneath it. I froze, my breath catching in my throat as the sound grew louder, closer, more urgent. The walls around me trembled, and I heard the faintest scraping noise. Something scratching, something clawing, trying to break through the stone. It wasn't until I heard the softest whisper, a voice so faint that I wasn't sure if it was real or just my imagination, that I realized what was happening. Not all who enter leave. I spun around, my heart now racing, eyes wide with terror, but there was nothing. Nothing but the deep, consuming darkness, pressing in like a vice. I couldn't see any doors, no windows, just the endless expanse of shadow. The air grew thicker, heavier, as if something unseen was pushing against me, forcing me to stay in place, to wait for what came next. The breathing sound grew louder still, now accompanied by a strange clicking noise. It sounded like something scratching against the stone, something crawling, dragging itself toward me. I wasn't sure how, but I knew that whatever it was not human. It was something ancient, something vile, and it was coming for me. I tried to move, but my body refused to obey. My limbs were heavy, sluggish, as if something was siphoning my energy, draining my very strength. I wanted to scream, to run, but all I could do was stand there, rooted in place, paralyzed by a fear that I couldn't understand, yet couldn't escape. And then, the walls began to shift. The stone that had once been solid, unyielding, began to change. The cracks in the walls spread, widening like a mouth opening to swallow me whole. From within those cracks, I saw something moving. It was slow at first, but then faster, more erratic. Figures began to emerge, their forms contorting as they slithered through the cracks in the stone, their movements unnatural, as if they weren't quite human. I could hear their voices now, more whispers, more pleas, though I could not understand their words. But I could feel them, each voice gnawing at my mind, each word tugging at my sanity. Suddenly, I felt something grab my ankle, a cold, icy grip, like fingers made of ice, wrapping tightly around my leg. I gasped, trying to shake it free, but the grip tightened, pulling me backward toward the center of the room. My body was dragged, scraping against the stone, my heart pounding wildly as I struggled to break free. The figures from the cracks were moving closer, their eyes glinting like shards of glass, their twisted forms now fully emerging from the walls. I could see them clearly now. These were not ghosts, not spirits of the dead. They were something far worse. Their bodies were grotesque, gaunt and decayed, their skin pulled tight over brittle bones, their mouths gaping wide in permanent, horrific smiles. They had no eyes, only black voids where their faces should have been, and their limbs twisted at unnatural angles, crawling and writhing as though they were made of darkness itself. And then, from the depths of the darkness, a voice, deep and resonant, filled the air. "You are the next." The words were unmistakable. The thing in the shadows, the thing that had been watching me all along, spoke through the very walls of the manor, its voice shaking the very foundation beneath my feet. I could feel the vibration deep within my chest, my ribs aching with the pressure. "Join us." I knew then that I wasn't just in Ashwood Manor anymore. I was in its very heart. I had passed through the threshold of the house's ancient, cursed core, and now there was no going back. The house wasn't just alive, it was hungry, and I had walked straight into its maw. The creatures around me were closing in. I could feel their cold breath on my skin, their fingers brushing against my face. I could almost hear them laughing, a low, gurgling sound that made my blood run cold. I screamed, a desperate hoarse cry that echoed through the chamber, but there was no one to hear me. The manor swallowed the sound whole, and the laughter of the creatures grew louder, more mocking. I fought with everything I had left, trying to tear myself free from the grasp of the shadows, but it was useless. The darkness had me now, and it was pulling me into its depths, into the heart of Ashwood Manor, where I would remain, one of the lost souls who had entered and never returned. And as I was dragged further into the blackness, I knew this place would never let me go. Not ever. The darkness seemed to stretch forever, an endless abyss that devoured every trace of light, of hope. I had long since lost track of time, and now there was only the cold, the weight of the air pressing down on me, the suffocating presence of the shadows that surrounded me. Each step I took, or tried to take, felt heavier, as if the very ground beneath my feet was reluctant to allow my movement. The creatures, those twisted, grotesque beings, slithered alongside me, their dark, skeletal bodies scraping against the stone, their hollow, lifeless eyes locked on me, though their faces remained obscured. They followed with a sickening patience, never hurrying, never rushing, but always closing in, an inescapable circle of malice and darkness. I could feel the coldness of their breath on the back of my neck, could sense their hollow gazes trailing my every movement, their very presence pushing me deeper into the labyrinthine corridors of Ashwood Manor. The walls, once solid stone, seemed to shift and breathe, as though the house itself was alive and aware of every tremor in my body. The halls twisted and turned in unnatural angles, the doors I passed opening to reveal nothing but more empty space, or worse, more shadows, more creatures waiting just beyond the threshold. There was no escape, no exit. The house had claimed me, and now I was nothing more than another lost soul, doomed to wander its endless corridors, forever trapped in the void of its heart. The air grew thick, saturated with an unbearable chill that seemed to seep deeper into my skin with every passing moment. My teeth chattered involuntarily, my breath coming in ragged gasps, but still, I could not stop. I walked, or was dragged, onward, propelled by some unseen force, pulled toward a destination I could not comprehend. There was something ahead, something beyond the labyrinth of rooms, beyond the swirling darkness that enveloped me. A faint glow flickered in the distance, a soft, sickly light that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly rhythm. It was both a lure and a warning, pulling me toward it with an irresistible force. I reached it. The source of the light was a room, an ancient chamber, its walls covered in symbols I did not understand. They twisted, wriggled, and shimmered as though they were alive, their meanings buried beneath layers of time and darkness. The room was empty, save for a solitary object in the center, a stone altar, black as midnight, its surface smooth and cold. The glow emanated from beneath it, from deep within the stone itself. I could feel its heat, though it did not warm the air around me. It was a different kind of heat, one that burned from the inside out, a sensation that gnawed at my insides, that threatened to pull me apart from the very core of my being. I reached out, my hand trembling, the fingers numb with cold, and placed it on the surface of the altar. The moment I did, the ground beneath me trembled, as though the very foundation of the manor had shifted. The walls groaned, the air grew heavier, and for a moment I thought I heard the faintest rumbling sound, like the world itself was awakening from a long slumber. And then the shadows began to writhe. The creatures, those twisted, hollow-eyed beings, were no longer mere spectators. They moved, their forms stretching and shifting in impossible ways, merging with the walls, their bodies melting into the very air itself. The stone beneath me cracked open, the altar's surface splitting as though it were being ripped apart by an unseen force. The glow intensified, flooding the room with an intense, otherworldly light. A wave of nausea washed over me, the air thickening until it was impossible to breathe, impossible to think. I could feel myself being pulled into the altar, into the glowing fissures of light and shadow, my very essence being siphoned into the dark depths of the house. I tried to pull away, but it was futile. The house had me in its grip, and there was no escape. The creatures moved in closer now, their fingers trailing along my skin, their touch icy cold, burning through me as though they were feeding, siphoning whatever life force remained within me. And then, as if in one final, overwhelming surge, the darkness consumed me completely. I was no longer a person. I was a part of the house, a part of Ashwood Manor itself, forever bound to its heart, to the darkness that pulsed within its ancient walls. The whispers, the laughter, the breath of the house, all of it became a part of me, and I became part of it. Time no longer had meaning. The concept of movement, of change, faded into oblivion. There was only the infinite blackness, the soft pulse of the house's heartbeat, the endless labyrinth of corridors stretching out into eternity. And there, in the stillness of the house's heart, I understood. Ashwood Manor was not just a building. It was a living entity, an ancient being that consumed, that fed on those who wandered into its grasp. And now I was just another shadow, another whisper in the darkness, forever lost to its hunger. Time became irrelevant, and the very fabric of my being seemed to stretch, bend, and fragment within the cold embrace of Ashwood Manor. The pulse of the house reverberated through me, filling every empty space, every crevice of my mind, until I felt myself becoming one with it, an indistinct, formless part of the whole. The house had a hunger, a vast and endless hunger that consumed everything it touched, the shadows that clung to the walls, the floors that groaned with life, the endless corridors that twisted and turned in every direction. They all thrived on this hunger. It was ancient, older than the land itself, and it had fed for countless years. And now, I was nothing more than another offering in its endless feast. I moved, or perhaps I was moved, through the endless rooms and hallways. They were no longer spaces, no longer physical locations, but extensions of the house's will. The walls seemed to shift with each step, as if they were closing in on me, bending the space itself. I could no longer distinguish between reality and the nightmare the house had become. The air was thick, oppressive, heavy with the weight of lost souls, each one trapped within these walls, forever yearning for release but never finding it. The darkness seemed to stretch farther now, wrapping itself around me, engulfing every part of my senses. I could no longer hear my own footsteps. The only sounds were the faint murmurs of something far off, distant and unreachable. Yet it felt as if I were being watched, as if 1,000 unseen eyes were tracking my every movement. The presence of the house was suffocating, and I could feel it grow stronger with each passing moment. It was as if I was becoming part of its very foundation, sinking deeper into its grasp with every breath. The temperature dropped again, the chill seeping into my bones, freezing me from the inside out. The coldness was no longer just an external force. It had become part of me, as if my very essence had been corrupted by the house. I could feel my thoughts slipping away, my memories fraying at the edges, dissolving into the darkness around me. The hunger of the house was consuming me from the inside, erasing all that I once was. And then, amidst the crushing silence, there was a sudden movement. From the corners of the room, shapes began to emerge, slithering from the darkness like shadows given form. Their movements were fluid, unnatural, like liquid shadows that slithered across the floor and up the walls. The creatures, the entities that had once been part of the house's endless hunger, now came closer, drawn by the pull of the house's dark energy. They no longer had any clear shape, their bodies distorting and shifting as though they were made of pure darkness, woven together by the very night itself. I tried to move, to run, but my legs were like lead, heavy and unresponsive. The creatures inched closer, their movements more deliberate now, as if they were preparing to claim their next victim. Their presence filled the room, pressing against me from all sides. I could feel their cold, insubstantial touch on my skin, their tendrils wrapping around my limbs, pulling me into their embrace. I could no longer fight. The house had taken everything. The walls around me pulsed, the stone groaning as though it were alive, responding to the movement of the creatures that swirled around me. The air thickened even further, becoming almost tangible, suffocating me with its weight. I could feel myself losing what little sense of self I had left. The very fabric of my being was unraveling, consumed by the hunger of Ashwood Manor. The creatures encircled me, their cold, ethereal forms now fully engulfing me. They were not merely shadows. They were the very manifestation of the house's insatiable desire to consume, to feed on the souls that wandered into its clutches. They swirled around me, their presence a suffocating force, as I felt myself being pulled deeper into the center of the house, deeper into the void that had no end. I could feel the darkness growing, filling every part of me, suffusing my thoughts, my body, until I was no longer sure where I ended and the house began. The cold became all-consuming, and I could no longer hear anything but the deafening silence of Ashwood Manor, until, suddenly, a sound broke through. A faint, distant sound, like the scratching of claws on stone. The creatures stopped. The pulse of the house halted, as if it were listening. The scratching sound grew louder, more frantic, echoing through the halls like a desperate plea for release. And then, from the darkness ahead, something else emerged. It was a figure, but not like any figure I had seen before. Its form was indistinct, blurry, like a memory half-remembered, shifting in and out of focus. It seemed to be made of shadows, with no clear shape or color, just a vague, twisted outline that flickered in and out of existence. Its movement was erratic, its presence disorienting, like a ghost that didn't quite belong to this world. It was drawn to the creatures surrounding me, its unnatural form twisting and contorting, as though it was searching for something, or someone. The shadows seemed to recoil, to shrink away from it, and I could feel a shift in the air as the creature drew closer. The coldness intensified, the air thick with a presence that felt both ancient and unfamiliar, something far beyond the reach of Ashwood Manor. And as the creature reached the center of the room, the ground trembled, the walls groaning in protest. For a brief moment, time seemed to stop. The house, the creatures, the darkness, they all seemed to hold their breath, waiting for what was to come next. The creature reached out, its shadowy limbs extending toward me. The very air around it seemed to crackle with a force far greater than anything Ashwood Manor had ever known. And then, with a sudden, jerking movement, the darkness swallowed it whole, pulling it into the void from which it came. The creatures, the shadows, recoiled, as if they feared the presence that had briefly crossed their path. And for a moment, the house itself seemed to pause, to take a deep, uneasy breath. But I knew that the presence was not gone. It was just waiting, biding its time for the hunger of Ashwood Manor to stir again. The darkness, which had for so long felt like it was consuming me, now seemed to loosen, just slightly, as if the house itself were momentarily distracted. Yet I knew, deep within me, that it was only a brief respite, a momentary lull in the endless cycle of hunger. Ashwood Manor was eternal, and I had become just another lost soul within its endless labyrinth. The faint, oppressive stillness of Ashwood Manor was unbearable, like a thick blanket weighing on my chest, stifling my every breath. The echoes of the house's pulse still reverberated through the walls, vibrating deep in my bones. It was as if the manor itself had drawn in a breath, holding it, waiting for something, waiting for me to make a move, to succumb further to its pull. Though the creatures, those twisted shadows that had once surrounded me, had retreated, I knew that the house was never truly quiet. The darkness had only shifted, adapting, pressing itself deeper into every corner, every crack. I could feel it, an ever-present pressure, as though the house was now studying me, observing my every movement. Every step I took, I could hear it, whispers, soft and unintelligible, scratching against my mind. The air, thick with an unnatural cold, had become suffocating. The very walls seemed to tighten, their rough surfaces scraping as I walked. I had no destination now, no purpose other than to move, to avoid the stillness that threatened to consume me entirely. The corridors stretched endlessly, each turn leading to another indistinct hallway, another darkened room that only fueled the unease creeping through my veins. The manor had no windows. The light, whatever source of it existed, came from nowhere and everywhere. It had no warmth, no color, only a pale, almost sickly hue that seemed to bleed from the walls themselves. The shadows stretched and twisted unnaturally, as though they had lives of their own, forming grotesque shapes that flickered at the edge of my vision, just out of reach. I moved through the endless maze of rooms, unable to remember how long I had been walking, unable to feel the passage of time. The deep, groaning creaks of the floor beneath me had become a constant companion, an unsettling reminder that the house was not just a structure. It was a living entity. The house shifted again. There was a subtle change in the air, something so slight, so imperceptible, that I might have missed it entirely had I not been so attuned to every inch of my surroundings. The walls trembled, and the silence that had once been suffocating now became filled with a new sound, a low hum, distant but growing louder. It was the hum of something ancient, something deep within the foundation of the manor, something older than the stones themselves. I paused, sensing the shift, knowing that something in the manor had been disturbed. The hum grew louder, and with it, the darkness seemed to press closer, as though it were drawn toward the sound. I could feel the house reacting to whatever had awoken from its depths, and I could not help but move toward it. As I walked, the air grew denser, colder, each step heavier than the last. The walls around me seemed to narrow, the very space itself contracting, suffocating. And then I saw it. At the far end of the hall, a door stood slightly ajar, a faint, pulsating glow leaking from the crack. It was not the sickly light that filled the rest of the manor. It was something different, more intense, more alive. I approached cautiously, every instinct in my body screaming to turn away, to leave the manor's endless grip. But the pull of the house, its hunger, was undeniable. It called to me, urging me forward. There was nowhere to go but deeper, further into the heart of Ashwood Manor. The door creaked open as I pushed it, the hinges groaning in protest, as though the very act of opening it was a violation. The room beyond was shrouded in a thick mist, the glow coming from within, brighter now, illuminating the strange symbols etched into the walls. They were ancient, incomprehensible, twisting and curling in patterns that made the skin on the back of my neck prickle with unease. In the center of the room, something lay upon an altar, a dark obsidian stone. Its surface glowed faintly, as though it were absorbing the light from the walls around it, pulsating with a rhythm that matched the heartbeat of the manor. The stone seemed to hum, vibrating softly as if it were alive, drawing the darkness closer, feeding it, sustaining it. I approached the stone, unable to resist its pull, feeling the house's grip tighten around me with each step. The air was thick, suffocating with the smell of damp stone and something far older, far fouler, something that clung to the very essence of the house. The stone seemed to beckon to me. I reached out, my hand trembling, my fingers brushing its cold, smooth surface. The moment I touched it, the hum escalated into a deafening roar, shaking the very foundation of the manor. The walls buckled, and the floor beneath me trembled violently, as though the house itself was tearing apart. The stone's glow flared, blinding in its intensity. The light consumed everything, the shadows fleeing, curling back into the dark corners of the room. The roar of the stone reached a crescendo, and I could feel something ancient, something unfathomable, stirring beneath the house. The hunger that had once been subtle now rose to the surface, ferocious and undeniable. The walls groaned, and the floor cracked beneath my feet. The very air around me thickened, the temperature dropping so rapidly that I could see my breath condensing in the cold. The shadows returned, swirling faster now, as if they had been waiting, drawn toward the stone, drawn to the awakening force within it. I pulled my hand away, but the stone's grip on me was relentless. The house had claimed me, and now I was bound to it. The shadows closed in, the creatures from the walls slipping back toward me, their cold, unseen fingers crawling along my skin, drawing me closer to the altar. I could feel myself slipping, losing control, losing all sense of who I was, what I had been. The stone's power was overwhelming, consuming, and I knew that there would be no escape from it. Ashwood Manor was more than just a house. It was a prison, a sentient, eternal being that fed on the souls that wandered into its grasp. As the shadows encircled me, I knew that I had become part of the manor, a part of its hunger, its endless existence. The creatures, the whispers, the pulse of the house, all of it was now within me. I was no longer a visitor. I was a part of the darkness, a whisper in the endless night of Ashwood Manor. The walls closed in, and the darkness became complete. The darkness settled around me like a heavy cloak, suffocating and absolute. I was no longer aware of my own body, no longer a separate entity from the house. The stone beneath my feet seemed to melt away, as though the very ground itself was dissolving, and I was being pulled deeper, not into the physical space of Ashwood Manor, but into its very essence, its core. The light from the stone had faded, leaving only a lingering, cold afterglow that bled into the air, an eerie haze that stretched out in every direction. The shadows, which had once been content to wait in the corners, were now alive, writhing and twisting like serpents. They slithered across the floor, up the walls, and even through the air itself, feeding on the remaining light, turning the entire room into an abyss of endless darkness. I could feel the house, the manor, all around me, its breath, its heartbeat, slow and steady, like the rhythm of some ancient, insatiable creature. Every beat reverberated through me, rattling my bones and sinking deeper into my mind until I no longer knew where I ended and the house began. Time lost its meaning here. Days, years, centuries, they no longer existed. There was only the endless, oppressive darkness and the hunger that drove Ashwood Manor. It was as though the very air had become part of it, thick with the scent of decay, with the whisper of lost souls, the echoes of countless others who had wandered into the manor and never returned. The shadows shifted around me, circling like vultures, drawing closer with every passing moment. The silence that filled the air was not empty. It was the silence of something that had long since devoured every sound, every voice, and every thought that had dared to inhabit its space. And yet, there was something else beneath it, something deeper, something more ancient. I moved forward, though I couldn't recall the reason. I had no destination, no goal other than the overwhelming urge to keep moving through the oppressive, crushing darkness that surrounded me. I felt as though my legs were dragging through thick, viscous air, as if the very space had thickened around me, resisting my every step. The house was alive, watching, waiting for me to make my move, to give in to its hunger. And then I saw it. At the far end of the corridor, a faint light flickered, soft and distant, like the last dying ember of a fire. I couldn't say why, but the light called to me, urging me forward with an intensity that I couldn't ignore. I knew deep down that this was not a place of safety, not a place of refuge. But it was the only thing that existed in the suffocating dark, a beacon of something, even if it was only false hope. I pushed forward, the floor beneath me cracking with every step, the air around me thick with the oppressive weight of the house. The shadows clawed at my legs, reaching out with cold, spectral fingers, but I ignored them, driven by the strange pull of the light ahead. It was impossible to feel any warmth in it, but still it drew me closer, every step closer to the light, deeper into its grasp. As I approached, the light grew brighter, more defined, until it engulfed everything in its path. The shadows that had once filled the room began to withdraw, dissipating into the walls as if they were afraid of the light. But the light itself did not comfort me. It did not bring relief. It felt wrong, out of place in this world of endless night. And then I saw it. The source of the light was not a lamp or a candle. It was an orb, suspended in mid-air, hovering just above the ground. It glowed with an eerie, unnatural intensity, casting long, sharp shadows across the floor. The orb wasn't made of light. It was made of something else, something more sinister. Its surface flickered, shifting and warping, as though it were alive, pulsing with a rhythm that matched the heartbeat of Ashwood Manor. I reached out toward it, my fingers trembling, not out of fear, but out of a desperate need to understand. As my fingers brushed the orb, a violent shudder ran through the air, and the orb exploded in a burst of light. But it was not a burst of warmth or salvation. It was a burst of cold, an all-consuming cold that ripped through my body and soul. The world around me fractured, splitting into 1,000 pieces, each one fading into a blur of darkness. The coldness wrapped around me, tighter and tighter, until I could no longer breathe, until the very essence of my being was frozen, suspended in this space between light and shadow. I tried to scream, to call out, but no sound came. The cold had taken my voice, had taken my very soul. The shadows returned, stronger now, more insistent. They swarmed around me, their tendrils curling into the spaces between my ribs, burrowing deep within me. They were not merely consuming me, they were becoming me, twisting my form into something unrecognizable, something formless, a part of the dark heart of Ashwood Manor. The house had found me, it had claimed me, and as the shadows swallowed me whole, I realized that I would never leave. I would never escape. I would remain here, within the house, lost among the endless corridors, a whisper in the darkness, another lost soul in the unyielding embrace of Ashwood Manor. And the house. The house would continue, its hunger never satisfied, forever reaching for more, forever waiting for the next to enter its endless void. The stillness in the heart of Ashwood Manor was absolute. No sound, no breath, no sensation of time, only an eternal, suffocating silence that pressed in from every direction. The house had swallowed me whole, devouring every trace of my existence, until I had become indistinguishable from the shadows, a part of its ceaseless hunger. There was no floor beneath me, no walls surrounding me, only an expanse of void, an endless chasm where the very fabric of reality seemed to bend and warp. The air was thick and dense, and it felt as though the darkness itself was alive, breathing, pulsing with the rhythm of the manor's heart. There was no escape, no exit, just the oppressive weight of the house that had consumed me, body and soul. And yet, even in this endless void, I could feel it, the pull. The house had not finished with me. It was not done. The void around me seemed to stretch and twist, and the shadows that had once lurked in the corners of the manor now surrounded me, crawling along the edges of my vision. They were not just shadows anymore. They had become something more, something that was part of the very essence of Ashwood Manor. I could feel their presence, 1,000 eyes watching me, as though the walls themselves were alive, aware of my every movement, my every breath. The floor, if it could even be called that, shifted beneath me once more. It was no longer solid, no longer reliable. It writhed like the surface of water, undulating with a dark rhythm, as though it were the living skin of the house itself. Each movement, each shift, felt like a warning, a reminder that Ashwood Manor was still in control. I tried to move, to free myself from its grasp, but the darkness held me in place, thick as tar. It pressed against my limbs, cold and suffocating, keeping me locked within its infinite expanse. I could no longer feel the passage of time, no longer feel the air in my lungs. Everything was consumed by the shadow, as though I had been swallowed by the very foundation of the manor itself. Then, in the distance, I saw it, a faint, flickering light, smaller this time, dimmer, almost imperceptible. It hovered just beyond the reach of the shadows, like a single star in an otherwise endless night. I did not understand why it was there, why it called to me, but I could not help but move toward it. My legs, stiff and heavy, seemed to obey the pull of the light without thought. The house, the darkness, the hunger, they had all receded, if only for a moment, and the light was my only guide, my only hope. But the light was not what it seemed. As I drew closer, it grew brighter, expanding in a way that felt unnatural, as if it were consuming the very darkness around it. The shadows recoiled, as though they were afraid of what this light was, what it might reveal. And yet the closer I got, the more the light seemed to twist, to shift, becoming something far darker than anything I had encountered before. It was no longer a soft glow. It became harsh, burning with an intense radiance that was both alluring and terrifying. It began to pulse, sending waves of energy rippling outward, distorting the air, distorting my very perception of reality. The darkness seemed to fight against the light, recoiling with a force that shook the very ground beneath me. The shadows, once distant, now converged upon the light, clinging to it, tugging at it, trying to swallow it whole. The very walls of the manor groaned under the strain, as if the house itself was struggling to contain this force, this anomaly. And then, with an overwhelming sense of inevitability, the light collapsed. It imploded, folding in on itself, and the explosion of energy was unlike anything I had ever experienced. The shockwave reverberated through the void, shattering the stillness, sending a wave of darkness crashing over me, suffocating, overwhelming, drowning me in its depths. The air itself seemed to choke, and I could feel the weight of the house crushing down on me, the hunger growing, intensifying. For a moment, I thought I saw something. A glimpse of it, hidden deep within the light. A figure, a shape, blurred and distorted, reaching out. But before I could focus, the darkness consumed everything, erasing the vision as quickly as it had appeared. The shadows closed in again, tighter this time, more forcefully, as though they were tightening their grip on me. They wrapped around my body, my mind, pulling me deeper into the house's depths, where nothing but the hunger remained. There was no escape from Ashwood Manor. There was no light that could save me. I was lost, trapped in the eternal night of the house. I could feel it now, a gnawing sensation deep within me. I was no longer a visitor, no longer a lost soul merely passing through. I had become part of it. I had become part of the darkness. The house had taken me, and it would never let me go. The darkness swirled, thick and oppressive, pressing in from all sides as the walls seemed to close in around me, suffocating my thoughts, clouding my perception. The hunger of Ashwood Manor, ancient and insatiable, pulsed through the very air, a constant, relentless force that could not be avoided. I felt it in my bones, in every fiber of my being, its gnawing presence, its unyielding grip. There was no time here, no day or night. There was only the endless darkness, the weight of the manor pressing down, wrapping around me. I moved, or perhaps was moved, through the corridors of the house. My steps echoed loudly in the silence, but there was no real sound, only the faintest hum, a low, almost imperceptible vibration that seemed to emanate from the very walls. The shadows followed me, curling around my legs, my arms, like tendrils reaching out, tugging at me, urging me forward, drawing me deeper into the heart of the manor. The deeper I went, the stronger the pull became. There was no escape. No matter which direction I turned, the darkness followed. The corridors twisted and bent in impossible angles, stretching out into infinity. The walls were cracked, the stone old and crumbling, yet the manor seemed unchanged. The stone floors were cold beneath my feet, rough with age, as though they had borne witness to countless others who had wandered these halls before me. Their footsteps, their whispers, their suffering. These things remained in the very bones of the house, embedded in the walls and the floors, the air itself. Their presence lingered, forgotten but never gone. I was not alone in this place. I knew that. The house was filled with them, those who had come before, drawn to the manor by the same insidious hunger that had called to me. They were the ones whose footsteps echoed through the halls, whose whispers filled the empty spaces, whose souls had become lost to Ashwood Manor. But they were not at rest. They were trapped, bound to the house, to its insatiable hunger. As I walked, I could feel them, their cold, unseen fingers brushing against me, their presence just out of reach, but ever so close. The shadows thickened around me, swirling, shifting as if the very house were alive and watching, its eyes hidden in the dark, studying my every movement, waiting for me to slip, to falter. The house was closing in on me again, its presence more oppressive, its hunger more palpable. I moved faster now, driven by an instinct I couldn't name, but something told me it didn't matter how fast I moved. The house would catch up. It always did. Ahead, I saw it. A door, just like all the others. But this one felt different. It was old, its surface weathered, the wood dark and rotted, the edges splintered. It was the only thing in the corridor that stood out, a stark contrast to the endless shadows. I didn't want to go toward it. I didn't want to open it. But the pull of the house was stronger than my fear. I reached for the doorknob, my hand trembling as my fingers brushed against the cold metal. The moment my skin made contact, a surge of energy shot through me, cold and sharp, like a bolt of ice. The door creaked open on its own, as though it had been waiting for me. The moment it opened, the temperature dropped drastically, the air thick with a heavy, unnatural chill. The room beyond was dark, shrouded in a blackness so dense it felt as though it was swallowing the very light around me. But even in the pitch-black room, I could feel something. Something vast and ancient. Something that had been waiting in the depths of the house. The air was thick with it, oppressive, and it reached out to me like a hand, beckoning me forward. I stepped inside. The moment I crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut behind me with a force so great it shook the room, rattling the walls, sending a wave of dread crashing over me. I turned back, but the door was gone. replaced by smooth stone walls that had not been there moments before. I was trapped. The room was suffocating. The darkness pressed in, seemed to grow thicker the longer I stood there. The walls closed in around me, not physically, but in a way that made me feel smaller, more insignificant. I tried to move, but my limbs felt heavy, as though the very air around me was draining me of strength. I was being pulled deeper, further into the room, until I could no longer fight it. It was then that I noticed it. The flicker of light, far in the distance, just beyond the oppressive darkness. It wasn't the same as the sickly glow that had beckoned me before. This light was different. It was a cold, blue light, barely visible, but unmistakable. It was faint, like the glow of a dying star, but it was enough to draw me forward. I moved toward it, my legs trembling with each step, my heart pounding in my chest. The air grew colder, the shadows more suffocating, but the light called to me, pulling me toward it. I had to reach it. I had to see what it was. As I moved closer, the shadows recoiled, parting around the light, as if afraid of it. The closer I got, the more the darkness seemed to vanish, as though the light was burning it away. I reached the source. It was another door, just a simple, old wooden door, no different from the others, but the light came from within. It beckoned, glowing with a soft, pulsating radiance, the same unnerving glow that had drawn me here, yet now it felt different, as though it was offering me something, or perhaps taking something from me. I reached for the doorknob, and as my fingers touched it, the light flared, a flash of brilliance that was both painful and blinding. The darkness screamed in protest, retreating into the corners of the room, but the light did not relent. With a force I could not resist, the door swung open, but there was nothing beyond it. Only the abyss, and the pull of the house grew stronger than ever. The door swung open, but beyond it there was nothing. No room, no walls, no light. Only an infinite expanse of pure, unbroken darkness that stretched out before me, swallowing everything in its path. The pull of the house, the hunger, surged through me, stronger now, as though the very fabric of the manor was pulling at my soul, drawing me into the abyss. I stood at the threshold, my heart racing, every instinct screaming at me to turn away, to run back through the door, to find some way out. But there was nowhere to run. There was no escape from the relentless pull of Ashwood Manor. Every thought, every movement felt sluggish, as though the house itself were sapping my strength, weighing me down with each passing second. The darkness ahead seemed to grow, expanding with an insatiable hunger, consuming every sliver of light, every trace of warmth. I could no longer feel my body, no longer sense the air around me. There was only the darkness, endless and suffocating, and the pull of the house, its cold, hungry grip tightening with every moment I stood there, rooted in place. And then something shifted. The air around me grew colder still, and the darkness began to move, twisting, undulating as though it were alive. I could feel it moving closer, feel its tendrils wrapping around me, drawing me into the void. The walls of the room, the walls of the manor seemed to fade, losing their definition, losing their substance, until there was nothing but the deep, ever-expanding abyss before me. I tried to scream, but my voice was lost, swallowed by the dark. I tried to move, to step back, but the darkness clung to me, cold and heavy, pulling me deeper into its grasp. My body felt numb, my limbs unresponsive, as though I were sinking into the floor itself, sinking into the heart of the house. The pull was relentless, and the shadows swirled faster now, thickening around me, crawling over my skin like ice. The house was alive, feeding on my fear, on my helplessness. Every fiber of my being was consumed by the hunger of Ashwood Manor. and I could feel myself slipping away, my essence dissolving into the darkness that surrounded me. I tried to resist, tried to hold on to whatever shred of myself I could find, but it was futile. The house was too powerful. The darkness was too vast. The pull of the manor, the insatiable hunger that drove it, was too much. There was no escaping its grip. There was no way out. The shadows around me grew thicker, more intense, until I could no longer see anything at all. The light had long since faded, leaving me in a crushing, suffocating blackness, a void that consumed everything, my thoughts, my memories, my very soul. And then there was a sound, a faint, distant whisper, barely audible but unmistakable. It was the sound of something, or someone, calling from deep within the house. The voice was soft, like a breeze rustling through the trees, but the words were incomprehensible, lost in the swirling darkness. The house, it seemed, had a voice that carried through the ages, a voice that could call the lost souls back into its grasp. I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe. I was trapped in this endless void, this eternal night. There was nothing but the house and its hunger, its insatiable desire to consume, to pull me into its depths and never let me go. But then, something changed. The shadows began to withdraw, receding back into the walls, back into the corners of the room. The coldness that had gripped me began to ease, just slightly, and the pull of the house loosened for a moment. I could feel the presence of the manor, like an ancient being watching from the edges of my perception, waiting for me to falter, to slip further into its grasp. I took a step forward, unsure why, but driven by an instinct I could no longer ignore. The pull was still there, still present, but it was weaker now, distant. I could feel the floor beneath my feet, solid, though it seemed to ripple, undulate, as though it were not entirely real. And then, I saw it. A light, a distant, flickering light, shining through the darkness. It was not the sickly glow of the previous light I had encountered, but something different. It was dim, soft, almost too faint to notice at first. But it called to me, a beacon in the void, a sliver of hope. I began to move toward it, each step slower than the last, my body heavy, reluctant to follow the pull of the light. The shadows began to retreat, but I could feel them still, lurking just out of reach, waiting to drag me back into the abyss. The hunger was never far away. It was always watching, always waiting, ready to consume me the moment I faltered. But the light was different. It was not like the other lights in the manor. Sickly, false, deceiving. This light felt real, warm, almost alive. As I drew closer, the shadows shrank away, retreating from the glow, as if they feared it. I reached for it, my hand trembling, my heart racing, unsure of what would happen next. But the light did not burn. It did not reject me. Instead, it embraced me, wrapping around me like a warm, comforting presence. It was not the house's hunger. It was something else, something unknown. But it felt like salvation. For a moment, I thought I might finally escape. I thought I might finally be free of Ashwood Manor, free of its relentless pull, its endless hunger. But as I stepped into the light, I felt the ground beneath me tremble once more. The walls groaned, the shadows closed in, and I realized the truth too late. The light wasn't salvation. It was the house's final trap. The light, which had once seemed like a beacon of hope, now felt like a lie. As I stepped further into it, expecting relief, I found myself only drawn deeper into the house's grasp. The warmth that had surrounded me a moment ago had turned cold, icy, biting, seeping into my bones. It was not the warmth of salvation, but the cold of something ancient, something that had been waiting patiently for me to make this very mistake. The glow that had once beckoned me now seemed to shift, distorting, flickering like a dying flame. It did not illuminate the room as I had expected, but instead cast strange, elongated shadows that seemed to creep and stretch along the walls, curling toward me like hands reaching out from the dark. I tried to pull back, to retreat into the darkness from where I had come, but the shadows that had once receded now returned in force, swirling like a vortex around me. The walls of the room, which had seemed solid moments before, now felt flimsy, fragile, as though the very foundation of the manor was crumbling away, revealing only more darkness beneath. There was no escape. The house was everywhere. Beneath me, around me, and within me. I could feel it then, the manor's presence. It was not just the air, the walls, the floors. It was inside me. The house had seeped into my very being, into my thoughts, until it had become a part of me, an extension of my soul. The hunger that had once only been a force in the walls now pulsed in my chest, syncing with the beating of my heart. I was no longer just a visitor in Ashwood Manor. I was part of it. The ground beneath me trembled again, and I stumbled, my legs buckling under an unseen weight. I could feel the darkness pressing in from all sides, tightening like a noose around my neck. The house was pulling at me, pulling me deeper into its bowels, into the core of its hunger. The shadows surged toward me, their cold tendrils curling around my legs, pulling me toward the center of the room. I reached for anything solid, anything that could stop my descent into the abyss, but my hands grasped only air. The walls had disappeared, the floor beneath me had melted away, and I was falling endlessly into the consuming darkness of the manor. For a brief moment, I thought I saw something moving within the shadows. A figure, barely discernible, flickering at the edge of my vision. It was tall, elongated, its form shifting in unnatural ways. Its face, if it could even be called that, was an empty void, black as pitch, sucking in the very light that surrounded it. I felt the figure's presence before I saw it, felt its gaze upon me, cold and heavy. The hunger was no longer a distant, abstract force. It was here, in the form of this thing, this creature that had been born from the depths of Ashwood Manor. It moved toward me, its body rippling like smoke, stretching and distorting as it reached out with long, skeletal fingers. It was not alive in the way I had once understood life. It was something older, something that had never known warmth, never known the comfort of light. It was a creature of darkness, a manifestation of the house's endless hunger. And it wanted me! I tried to scream, but my voice was lost in the suffocating silence that now filled the room. The hunger wrapped itself around my throat, squeezing, tightening, cutting off my breath. I tried to fight, tried to push back, but it was like fighting against the very walls of the house. There was no escape. There was nothing to push against. The darkness consumed everything. The creature's fingers brushed against my skin, and the coldness shot through me, freezing me from the inside out. I could feel it. The cold of the grave. The cold of something that had never known warmth, never known life. It was pulling me in, sinking its fingers into my flesh, drawing me into the darkness that had swallowed the house. The walls of Ashwood Manor were closing in again, but they were not walls anymore. They were tendrils, reaching, twisting, pulling at me, dragging me deeper into the heart of the house. I could feel myself losing my form, my sense of self, becoming nothing more than a shadow, a whisper, a flicker in the endless night. And then, as I was about to lose myself completely, I felt it. The floor beneath me give way, the world around me spinning. The house had let me fall. The darkness took me. It took me into its heart, into its very core, where the hunger was born. I was no longer a part of the world I had known. I had become part of Ashwood Manor, part of the endless cycle of hunger that drove it. The shadows were no longer separate from me. They were inside me, wrapped around my very soul. The house had claimed me. The shadows had claimed me. And as I drifted deeper into the endless night, I knew that there would be no escaping Ashwood Manor. There would be no end to its hunger. I was part of it now, forever. There was no time, no space, no escape. The very concept of reality twisted and shattered as I was pulled deeper into the house, the dark heart of Ashwood Manor. It was as though I were sinking into the very foundations of the mansion, into its bones, its endless hunger. The floor beneath me disappeared completely, leaving only an endless void. No walls, no ceiling, just the overwhelming, crushing weight of the darkness. The shadows were no longer mere shapes, but living entities, creatures that slithered along the edges of my perception, clawing at my mind, pulling at the very fabric of my soul. They whispered, soft and maddening, their words incomprehensible but piercing, as though they were scraping at my thoughts. I could feel them inside me, twisting, unraveling the last remnants of who I had been until I was no longer myself. Just another lost fragment of the house. I had lost my sense of self, lost the distinction between where I ended and Ashwood Manor began. The hunger of the house had consumed me, pulling every part of my being into its endless darkness. It was not just a house. It was a living, breathing thing, with a hunger that never ceased, a hunger that fed on souls, on memories, on the essence of anyone foolish enough to enter its walls. As I drifted through the void, I could feel the presence of others, the echoes of countless souls who had come before me, trapped in the same eternal prison. They were not visible, not in the way I had once understood the world. They were whispers in the dark, faint echoes of lives lost, voices that faded in and out of my perception, like distant memories I could no longer hold on to. Their presence was suffocating, and I could feel the weight of their despair pressing in, trying to drag me deeper into the abyss. The hunger of Ashwood Manor was a force that could not be denied, a force that consumed everything in its path. I had become part of it, an unwilling servant to its insatiable desire. The walls that had once held me captive were now nothing more than shadows, shapeless and ever-changing, like the mind of the house itself. I could feel the manor watching, waiting, as if it were studying me, trying to understand how far it could push me, how much it could consume before there was nothing left. The darkness stretched out before me, an endless sea of nothingness that seemed to stretch on for eternity. It was the heart of the house, a place where time had no meaning, where reality itself had been bent and twisted by the hunger that pulsed through Ashwood Manor. The very air felt thick with something ancient, something old and malevolent, and I could feel it, deep within my bones. The house was alive, and it had no intention of letting me go. I tried to resist, tried to fight against the pull of the shadows, but there was nothing I could do. My body, my soul, my very essence had been consumed by the house. It was pulling me deeper still, down into the void, into the darkness that lay at the core of Ashwood Manor. And then, just when I thought I could no longer bear the weight of the darkness, I felt something shift. A crack, a sliver of light, faint and distant, appeared before me, like the faintest flicker of a dying star. It was a soft, cold light, different from the warmth I had hoped for, but it was something. It called to me, a tiny thread of hope in the overwhelming abyss. I reached toward it, my limbs heavy, my mind clouded, but there was nothing else left for me. I had no choice but to follow the light, to move toward it, even if it was only a fleeting illusion. The darkness recoiled, parting slightly around the light, as though it feared it. The light grew brighter as I moved toward it, but as I did, I realized that it was not drawing me in, it was pushing me back. The shadows surged forward again, closing in, trying to consume me before I could reach the light. I could feel the pull of the house, the insatiable hunger that wanted me, wanted everything within me. The darkness was closing in again, faster now, suffocating, overwhelming. The light flickered, weakening with every step I took, until it was just a faint glow, barely visible in the suffocating blackness. And just as I reached for it, the light vanished, leaving me in absolute darkness once more. The house had won. It always did. There was no escape. The light was nothing more than an illusion, a brief hope to keep me moving, a way to prolong the inevitable. Ashwood Manor had no room for light. It was a place where only darkness existed, a place that devoured everything it touched. I was lost in it, a part of it now, bound to the endless, eternal hunger of the house. There would be no end. There would be no escape. I was part of the shadows now, part of Ashwood Manor, and I would remain here forever, one of the countless souls that had been consumed by its hunger. And in the silence of the house, in the endless dark, I could feel the presence of others, trapped with me, just as I had once been trapped by the house. Together, we would drift forever, lost in the dark heart of Ashwood Manor. The darkness enveloped me completely, an infinite void that swallowed everything, sound, thought, even time itself. There was nothing left to hold on to, no sense of self, no memory of what had come before. I was lost, adrift in the endless expanse of Ashwood Manor, a part of its hunger, a whisper among the countless souls trapped within its walls. The house had consumed me, taken everything I was. There was nothing left but the endless pull, the slow grinding of the house's hunger, always drawing me deeper into its core. And yet, amid the crushing weight of the darkness, a strange sensation flickered within me. Something felt wrong. The house, which had once been so alive, so hungry, now seemed still. The air, thick with the oppressive presence of the manor, had suddenly become quiet. Too quiet. The pulsating rhythm of the house's heartbeat, the constant gnawing of its hunger, had stopped. For a moment there was no sound, no pull, no hunger, just an eerie stillness that seemed to stretch out into infinity. I stood still in the vast, suffocating void, trying to make sense of the unnatural silence. The walls, once so relentless, once closing in from every direction, were now absent. The weight of the house had lifted, no longer pressing down on me, no longer suffocating me. It felt as though the manor had paused, waiting, holding its breath. And then I felt it, a coldness. Not the coldness of the shadows, not the chill of the house's hunger, but a deeper, more primal cold. A cold that seemed to come from within me. My thoughts, my memories began to surface. But they weren't my own. They were twisted. They were not my life, my past. They were someone else's, someone who had come before me, someone whose name I didn't know, whose face I couldn't see. Suddenly, I understood. Ashwood Manor hadn't been feeding on me at all. It wasn't just consuming my soul. It had been creating me. I was no visitor to the house. I was a reflection of it, a byproduct of its hunger. The voices, the shadows, the dark heart of the manor. They were not merely trapped within it. They were all part of me. I was a fragment of the manor itself, a piece of the house's eternal essence, molded and shaped by its insatiable need to consume. The realization hit me like a wave. The countless souls I had felt around me, those whispers in the dark, the faint traces of memories I couldn't grasp, were not the remnants of lost visitors. They were the remnants of me. Every time Ashwood Manor devoured a soul, it didn't just claim them, it recreated them, transforming them into new fragments of itself. I was no different. I was nothing more than a hollow echo, a shadow that had once been alive, now part of the house's endless cycle. The coldness within me deepened, and I felt something stir inside my chest. It was a pulse, faint but undeniable. A heartbeat. Not my heartbeat. The heartbeat of the house, the heart of Ashwood Manor. I reached up, instinctively pressing my hands to my chest. The pulse was growing stronger now, faster, louder. It wasn't mine. It wasn't my body. I wasn't the one living. The house was living through me. I was a vessel. I was nothing more than a manifestation of its hunger, its endless need for more. And as the heartbeat intensified, I felt the dark presence of the house begin to recede. But not entirely. The shadows that had once been my prison now felt distant, far away. The pull of the darkness faded, but only because I had become the darkness. I was no longer trapped within the walls of Ashwood Manor. I had become the walls, the hunger, the very core of the house. But that wasn't all. As I stood there, feeling the pulse of the manor course through me, I looked around the void that had once consumed everything. The room, the walls, the corridors. They were all gone, replaced by an infinite expanse of white, empty, clean, silent. And then, from the empty whiteness, the doors appeared. One after another, they materialized out of the void, lined up in a row before me. They were familiar, old wooden doors, the same as the ones I had passed through within Ashwood Manor, each one different but equally worn with age. Each door had its own markings, its own presence, yet they were all mine, all a reflection of me. I moved toward them, my legs moving on their own accord, as though I had no choice. The first door swung open, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. I stepped through it. The second door appeared as I passed, and I reached for the handle before realizing what I had just done. Each door that appeared was a reflection of a past life, a fragmented memory, each one leading me further away from who I had been. I stepped through each one, moving through the endless hallways of my own past, until there were no more doors, no more spaces left to pass through. And I realized, with sickening clarity, that Ashwood Manor hadn't just consumed me. It had consumed everyone. It had created us all, woven us from the darkness of its hunger, until we became nothing more than reflections of the house itself. Every soul that had entered was now a part of the manor, their memories scattered like dust in the wind, unable to escape the endless loop. I was no longer part of the house. I was the house.